I first want to greet you in the name of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I and Empress Menen Asfa. We want to thank you for once more joining the School of the Sacrament Rastafari University for one of our webinars. Today is not August 17th, but the occasion that we are recognizing is Marcus Garvey's birthday yesterday. Being widely celebrated today in different quarters. Here in this space, we could not miss the opportunity to join in the celebration of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey by way of offering our community a tribute or a treat, for want of a better word, exposing scholarship which many of us might not be aware of around Marcus Garvey's legacy. I want to, before I get into our specific lecture, I want to just say a word about the School of the Sacrament, Rastafari University. We are a professional organization of Rastafari scholars. We have existed since the winter of 2020. We're now moving into our 5th year at the end of this year. And over that period of time, we have sought to produce content in a way that becomes retrievable long after the events, largely driven by the Pan-African Rastafari imperatives. We've sought to archive significant contributors as well as to mark important anniversaries and occasions through various projects and activities. We've recently completed our 4th international summer school here in Jamaica. And, you know, that has been one of our primary offerings that provides a kind of promise in linking what we do with an active student community, which we don't presently have. We've mentioned that we are a university. We do not yet have a full curriculum, but we're working on that and we'll keep you updated and abreast as we move in that direction. I want to next just recognize members of our team who are present, Ras Robbie, Sister Colleen, Brother Jakes, Raseku Tafari, I'm not sure if Dominic is here, Mama Willetti, and I think I'm seeing those as the primary ones. The idea is that we hold Pan-African holidays as very important, and Marcus Garvey's anniversary itself, we have never celebrated in this way, but thought it important that we, in moving into our 5th year, our 5th cycle, make sure that we have this kind of contribution in our space as well. I want to now turn to our very special guest, Dr. Justin Donovan, who is a personal friend that I'm delighted to share this space and that he is willing to speak to us this afternoon. I want to say that he's a young man who I think holds the kind of inspiration and promise that we would want to see of our community generally. A genuine intellectual, but also very much a regular young man with all of the related interests and hobbies, which I hope he speaks to a little. In fact, part of the reason for inviting him is that I think we often speak to older people, and you know, we prioritize those who are already the converted. Justin, as a young African-American, however, has consistently shown an interest in Jamaica. I first met him as a Fulbright student arriving from the United States in 2009. And we have kept connections since then. But I want to say that as a Fulbright in a, so to speak, gap year, trying to find his way into graduate work, Justin demonstrated the kind of seriousness of purpose and real fully deployed in the Jamaican experience. He audited several of my courses and other courses that colleagues did. But by the time he was ready to leave Jamaica, he was able to assemble all of the scholars together to share with them research that he had brought together in the Jamaican space. And that was received with a certain kind of overwhelming gratitude, because he's a genuine scholar, as you will see in a little while. I am going to move to introduce our honored guest, Dr. Justin Donovan. Dr. Donovan is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at UCLA. His current research is in the US Virgin Islands, investigating relationships between ecology and enslavement in the former Danish West Indies. In addition to his archaeological research, Justin is co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists and an AAUS scientific scuba diver. I'm sure he'll tell us a little more as to what that is. We want to turn our attention now to Dr. Donovan, who will speak to us today about the search for the Black Star Line. Please help me to welcome him.
Thank you, Professor Naya. Bongo Naya. I have a tendency to continually refer to as Dr. Professor, because 15 years ago, I was a student at UWI, and those memories still seem like yesterday. I want to give thanks for being able to be here to speak with you all. I know transitioning perfect. I do have a PowerPoint slide. I'm going to talk through some of the work that we've been doing, but I just wanted to add some context because I know it's been a while, and there's a sort of long trajectory between where I've come from and where I'm going now. As was mentioned, I studied archaeology throughout university. I went to Howard University undergraduate, spent a year at UWI, and I also taught at Liberty Hall in Parade down there for a little bit as well. Before I went on to do the PhD at University of Florida in archaeology. And there my dissertation research changed actually to Ethiopia. And I studied kingdoms in southern Ethiopia, specifically looking at the Walaita, doing most of my work there before transitioning back to the Caribbean. And it was back in the Caribbean where I started looking at this idea of slavery and ecology. I see a volume up question. Yeah. Can others hear me well? I know we have at least one person that's, see if I can. Okay, perfect. All right, so that brought me then into the research that I'm currently writing up now on environment and slavery, and I can talk more about that, I guess, later on if you all would like to hear where that's going. But the focus of the conversation today is actually on a project that I've been working on for the last few years and is starting to pick up speed, you could say now, and that is on this search for the Black Star Line. And hopefully you all can see this pretty clearly. Let me move this bar so it doesn't block off the top of the PowerPoint. Okay, perfect. Okay, so just to touch on this topic of the Black Star Line, I'm going to touch on a few different aspects of this work. One is just talk about the Black Star Line in general. Give you some background context into what it was able to do, what it had tried to do, and then the ultimate demise. Talk about the search for the Black Star Line. So the next project that I'm engaging in is actually looking for the physical wrecks of the Black Star Line. And I'll talk to you all a bit about what underwater archaeology entails in doing this work and how we can use some of these methods from anthropology and archaeology to actually recover some of these stories and these ships. And then I'm going to touch on this idea of recovering ancestral memory. And this is sort of a new direction where I'm going with the work that we've been doing. And it's trying to reframe this work, not as archaeology, but as this recovery of ancestral memory. And hopefully, as I describe it, you'll start to understand how this sort of breaks beyond the boundaries of this discipline that we've been taught of as archaeology, and how others can see themselves fitting into this narrative and this story as well. All right, so with that, I'll do a short overview in terms of what the Black Star Line is and was, and what it was able to do. As many of you know, it was founded by Marcus Mosiah Garvey in 1919. It was seen as one of several corporations under the Universal Negro Improvement Association. A series of the Negro Factory and a series of other industries also spurred out of this moment in 1919, really trying to create this industry associated with the Black Star Line. It operated until 1922, and I'll talk a little bit about its demise in 1922 and what led to that process. And it's probably most well known for the financial difficulties that it faced and its eventual bankruptcy and demise. But I'll kind of add more context to that narrative and really talk more about what the Black Star Line was able to do. Here on the right of my screen, you'll see this is a stock that was sold in the Black Star Line. So Marcus Garvey actively fundraised around the Black Star Line with individuals associated with the UNIA purchasing stock. These stocks were purchased by people all over the world. There was a lot of fundraising campaigns happening in Cuba, Costa Rica, Panama, wherever the UNIA organization was, individuals were buying into this idea of Black Star Line. And then ultimately the infiltration of government agents. And it's been argued, it's been said that actually the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, hired their first Black agent specifically to infiltrate the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and specifically using the Black Star Line as the entryway to take down Garvey and to get him removed from the United States because the organization was growing so powerful then. So the Black Star Line figures heavily in this conversation. Many individuals talk about the economic importance and impact of the Black Star Line. I think it's important to know that the Black Star Line in 1919 was a critical moment that was going on in the world at this time. We're finishing World War I. You've got Red Summer that's happening in the US, where you've got race riots occurring all over the United States. And there really is this push of Black nationalism that really begins to rise, especially as more individuals from the West Indies are coming into America. There's a number of books that have been written about this moment and the importance of this, and particularly about the UNIA as an organizing force in this process. But many individuals are also coming back from war looking for jobs and employment. And this is where the UNIAs, the Negro factories, as well as the auxiliary organizations in the Black Star Line become critical, because it provides a place of employment for many individuals that are returning from World War I. It's known as an attempt at a Black-owned shipping line to promote trade, and I think this is something that often gets overlooked. There's this understanding that when we think of the Black Star Line, usually we think of this idea of a Back to Africa movement, and that was one of the elements of it. But really, Garvey had created this to be a shipping line, but then also to engage in other maritime transportation-related activities, which I'll get into when I talk specifically about the specific ships that were involved in this trade. This would have been the first Black-owned shipping line at this time. I used to tell people to compare it to a sort of Black-owned airline company, but I don't think that really does it justice. I always tell people it's more like a Black spaceship company with the level and the magnitude in terms of where they're going with this. Immediately after World War I, there's a lot of ships that are decommissioned after the war, and as a result of this, it sort of feeds into this ability to purchase ships for the shipping industry. Of course, it leads to limited success due to financial mismanagement, some people say, and external pressures. But I would argue the mismanagement wasn't an intentional mismanagement, but it was actively sort of perpetrated against the organization, as we'll talk about the ways in which the company was demised. But perhaps more importantly, and several others have argued this, is this idea that the Black Star Line was more than just a shipping company, and the economic angle was really a small component of what it was trying to do. It symbolized economic empowerment throughout the African diaspora, for sure, with shipping and maritime trade increasing and becoming a source of mobility. it was critical to have a Black-owned shipping company. And many people didn't realize as well that it was named the Black Star Line in some ways to counter this idea of the White Star Line, of which the hallmark ship of the White Star Line trading company was the Titanic. So the idea is that you're building an organization that rivals what would then be known as one of the sort of hallmark white organization shipping lines. But it represented hope and a reclamation of this idea of the Middle Passage, is this idea that the Atlantic is not a place of death. And I know a lot of theorists are thinking about this now, but a place that we can continue to control and think about a lifeway for transport, which I think is critical. And then, of course, it's linked to Pan-Africanism and the collective identity. As I'll talk to later, most people know about this idea of the Back to Africa movement, as was mentioned in the video. But again, it's much more than that. And it's about connecting diaspora into this larger Black world. All right, so the ships of the Black Star Line. Again, with this idea of the Back to Africa movement, many people may have heard of the SS Phyllis Wheatley as the Back to Africa movement ship, which was intended to actually be prepared for transatlantic voyage to take individuals back to the coast of Africa. However, that ship was never actually purchased, and the 3 ships that were purchased included the SS Frederick Douglass, the SS Antonio Maceo, and the SS Shadyside, which are all pictured here. They have their original names attached to them. So the one front and center is the SS Antonio Maceo that's renamed. The one to the top right is the SS Frederick Douglass. And the bottom left is SS Shadyside. And I'll go into more detail about the specifics of these ships and what they actually did under the direction of the Black Star Line. Many people also aren't aware that after the Black Star Line collapsed in 1922, the Black Cross Nurses opened up a Black Cross Nurses trading and shipping company. And from that, we have this famed SS Phyllis Wheatley, which is eventually what leads Marcus Garvey into prison, and the FBI use it as the way to extradite him from the United States. But the ship on the right, the SS Booker T. Washington, becomes the hallmark ship of the Black Cross Nurses. And the idea is that, is similarly to the Black Star Line, this ship was then going to serve as a transport ship throughout the Caribbean, and it did make a maiden voyage as well. So we'll talk about that in a second. I do want to talk a little bit about this idea of this search for the Black Star Line, and again, just to add some context. The idea for this project really came about after the last underwater archaeology project I worked on, and I know we have some individuals in the room here that have helped on this project as well. But the Clotilda, some of you may know the Clotilda was the last slave ship to enter the United States, and it was discovered or recovered in 2019. And in 2019 in Mobile, Alabama, it was uncovered in Mobile Bay. And we participated in the excavations on this ship. From that voyage, there was a number of Africans that were brought from modern-day Benin into Mobile, Alabama, and then sold into Alabama. Soon after slavery ended, they returned to try to get transportation back to Africa. And of course, when that was denied, they set up a community called Africa Town, which still exists today. So in Mobile, Alabama, you can visit Africa Town. This ship rests beyond these coasts. But it was this work and this project that really helped to propel what would then become this search for the Black Star Line. Working on this project, I realized that the archaeology work we were doing was way beyond just this idea of documentation or historical reference, and really had the ability to open up conversations that needed to be had about not only the legacies of slavery, but also what happens to these stories when they get brought back into popular memory and into these communities. And in this case, it led to the publication of Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston, and more individuals talking about this history of the Clotilda and the community of Africa Town. But from that, I also had this interest then to move beyond this discussion of enslavement when we talk about underwater archaeology and the sites that we can work on. There's a number of projects currently ongoing looking for slave ships throughout not only the Caribbean, but the coast of Africa. But there weren't very many projects actually looking for other narratives of African history and African diasporic history and culture. And so in an effort to do that, I was asked or approached by an organization, and they said, what project would you work on if you had unlimited resources? And that's when I said I would venture out and try to look for the Black Star Line ships. And they approached me and asked me how much it would cost to engage in this endeavor. And when I put out some feelers and asked around and talked to folks, I learned very quickly that it wasn't an issue of money, but it was an issue of motivation and interest. And from that, I abandoned the idea of needing to have an organization to work with or needing to get funding. And I just began to embark on the process just as a collective of individuals to see if we could actually locate these ships and begin to start this project as a collective movement. In some ways similar, in a similar vein to the way in which the Black Star Line and the Universal Negro Improvement Association were actually formed. So my family is originally from Brooklyn, New York. On a visit to see family members, I stopped by Harlem, of course, and tried to retrace some of the locations and the locales in which Marcus Garvey and the Black Star Line were actually formed. For those of you who know, the Black Star Line Corporation was established in Harlem. This is a group of individuals in front of the corporation headquarters. And I went to visit the site again today. Of course, the building no longer stands, but the location is still there. And my brother and colleague, Dave Dredd, actually followed me along the process and did some photo documentation as well, which he has a new series out in Washington, D.C. If you're in Washington, D.C. area, he's got a photo exhibit up with some of these photos in it. And the idea with this process was not only to engage in an archaeology project, but again, in this project of recovery. And I'll talk about that in a second. We're not just looking for the physical ships, but we're looking for the memory of the ships, the traces of the ships, how the shipping company impacted communities, and what ultimately became of it. All right, so just to break down a few of the ships that were involved in the Black Star Line, I want to talk about the first one, the SS Shadyside. And the Shadyside was actually a ship that was engaged in what they called a cruise to nowhere. It was a steamer that would go up and down the Hudson River and essentially serve as a day trip for just Black members of the community who wanted to enjoy the views of the Hudson River. At the time, there were white cruise ships that were doing this, but there were no Black-owned cruise companies, and Black passengers didn't have access to this. So one of the first ships was this idea of having this cruise to nowhere that individuals in New York could partake in. Unfortunately, only ran for one summer before it sprang a leak and eventually sank. So this ship sank and is either in the Hudson River or in the Harlem River today. And I can talk a little bit more about where these ships may or may not be located. Right. The next ship was the SS Antonio Maceo. This was actually a steam yacht, and it was particularly used for passenger transport. This ship would be coming out of New York as well, and its initial voyage was destined for Cuba and Haiti and then Panama with 40 passengers on board. This ship was actually owned by a wealthy railroad tycoon who was selling it, and eventually the Black Star Line Company purchased it. The idea is that it would go to Cuba, Haiti, and Panama, drop off passengers along the way, and the passengers were paying for passage to each stop along the voyage. The intention was that it would then go on and continue passenger transport as well. It's named after Antonio Maceo, who some of you may know was a revolutionary Afro-Cuban fighter for Cuba's War of Independence from the Spanish. And of course, Garvey had a significant presence in Cuba. The Universal Negro Improvement Association had the most chapters in Cuba out of all the countries that they had. And as a result of that, there was a lot of connection between the Afro-Cuban community and the Black Star Line as well. Unfortunately, this ship had continuous issues, again, mostly emanating from the engine room. Before it left New York, it had to stop and restart at multiple points along its voyage to Cuba and Haiti and then Panama. And then eventually it actually returned to Cuba and an engine blew. And it was in that engine blew that it was actually decommissioned. It was no longer able to run. The organization had tried to make attempts to fix it and to get it sent back to the States. But in 1925, a storm hit the coast of Cuba and actually caused it to sink. And there's sort of mixed reports of where this ship is and what this ship was today, but some have argued that the ship sank off the coast of Antilla, Cuba. and is underwater. Others have argued that it was actually used as a storage facility into the 1960s, and half of it was above water and half of it was underwater. But just to provide some context on where that is, we're looking at sort of north central Cuba here in Antilla. And this port becomes particularly important because this was one of the largest UNIA chapters in Cuba, chapter number 52. And it was this chapter that had not only the UNIA, but actually had a Black Cross Nurse Division as well, and a series of other divisions. It was the largest chapter. It was the most active chapter. They had parades. They welcomed Garvey. They welcomed other senior UNIA members as well. And in some cases, it may have been just as, if not more important, to the UNIA chapter in Cuba than the chapters in Havana and Santiago de Cuba. So it's an important point of reference to note. When Garvey actually goes to prison, a number of fundraising campaigns happen in this region as well. And this stems in part from the fact that there's a United Fruit Company work happening in these areas. There's sugarcane cultivation happening in these areas. And many individuals actually coming from Jamaica and Trinidad and other places to work specifically in Banes and Antilla. And some people said that this area of Cuba specifically was known as a predominantly English-speaking region of Cuba because of those Caribbean connections. And Banes particularly becomes known as probably one of the more senior chapters during this time. The Negro World writes repeatedly about it. There's actually a Spanish language column for 2 pages. Particularly because individuals from Banes and other areas in Cuba are asking for more text in Spanish. And so it leads, again, to this promotion of unifying not just the Anglophone world, but also making sure that Spanish-speaking Afro-diaspora communities are also being critically engaged. And then the third ship, and probably the most prominent of the 3 ships, is the SS Frederick Douglass. And the SS Frederick Douglass was originally known as the SS Yarmouth during World War I. When it's purchased by the UNIA and the Black Star Line, it gets renamed to the SS Frederick Douglass. And this becomes sort of the hallmark ship making the first maiden voyage of substantial scale. So it had been used as a coal boat in World War I. And then it was also one of the first ships that was purchased. And this is where we start to see some of the issues arise with the Black Star Line. We mentioned a lot of the engine issues that a lot of these other ships had. It's been noted that the purchase of a lot of these ships were old and in disrepair. And in some cases, that may have been an intentional claim. It's been argued that Joshua Cockburn, who was the captain of this ship, actually facilitated the purchase of the ship, and in the facilitation of the ship, received a kickback for selling it way above its market price. And so this actually led to a whole series of financial issues that followed. We do know a lot about this ship in part because the first officer, Hugh Mulzac, ended up writing an autobiography some years later. And Hugh Mulzac becomes known much later, about 20 years later, because he becomes the captain of the Booker T. Washington, which was a ship actually owned by the Navy, not the Booker T. Washington of the Black Cross Nurses. But the SS Frederick Douglass, interestingly enough, has a voyage that we've been able to very clearly document from their first voyage. It was actually loaded with a shipment of whiskey, which was due to be sold in Cuba. And it was loaded in January of 1920. And some of you may or may not know, but 1920 prohibition kicks in the United States, making the sale of alcohol illegal. The ship actually had to leave too early, and it wasn't properly loaded. This may have actually been the last shipment of alcohol out of New York Harbor prior to prohibition kicking in. And as it was leaving the harbor, because it wasn't properly loaded, the vessel actually started to tip, and they had to jettison whiskey off the side of the vessel before it would be upright. So there's probably whiskey down somewhere off the coast of New York that was originally on this Black Star Line shipment. Because it left so early, the secretary of the Black Star Line wasn't able to get on the vessel, and he actually had to take a train all the way down to Florida and meet them off the coast of Miami. And off the coast of Miami, he joins on board. They continue on to Cuba. And in Cuba, it's believed that they sold the whiskey, but more importantly, they were able to make diplomatic connections and ties with individuals in the Cuban government and in the UNIA chapter in Cuba. From Cuba, they continue on to Jamaica, of course. And in Jamaica, and then later we'll see in Costa Rica, they're met with crowds of such large scale that they're reported in local newspapers. And in the case of Costa Rica, the local company actually has to declare a holiday because so many people take off work to visit the ship coming into harbor. But in Jamaica, they purchased a shipment of coconuts for resale, which then caused them to then make their way down to Panama. And in Panama, they go to Panama primarily, again, there's a large UNIA chapter in Panama, and it has to do more so with the labor movement. There's a number of individuals working on the Panama Canal who are striking. In addition to this, Henrietta Vinton Davis, who becomes the head of the UNIA when Garvey's arrested and afterwards, as well as Cyril Henry are working with organizers in Panama who are striking. They end up refitting the vessel, and in their refit of the vessel, they actually bring on about 500 striking workers onto the ship and continue on to the coast of Costa Rica, specifically to Limon. And some of you may know that Limon still has a Liberty Hall today. Limon has a large UNIA presence and chapter today. Actually, a PhD student, Jewel Humphrey, is there now, enjoying in the celebrations that they're having around Marcus Garvey's Earthstrong around this moment. But when the vessel entered the port of Limon, it's said that the United Fruit Company had to declare a national holiday because so many workers took off to watch this ship come into dock. Garvey made a speech, a number of other individuals made speeches, and it was seen again as a testament of the strength of the UNIA and the Black Star Line. From there, they continued on to Cuba, particularly to Santiago de Cuba. And it's here that they drop off those 500 striking workers and they arrive to new employment in the coast of Cuba. And this gets into this complex and interesting connection between the UNIA, Marcus Garvey, the Black Star Line, and the United Fruit Company and labor. And I think that's something that needs to be explored more in terms of how they were actively engaged in labor movements throughout the diaspora and throughout the Caribbean. And some people have written about these connections. After they go to Cuba, they stop off in Nassau, and it's been argued that Joshua Cockburn, his people are from Nassau, and he wanted to show off the fact that he was the captain of the ship, despite orders from Garvey and others to continue back to New York. It's said that they tried to drop the anchor here so he could actually dock, and they dropped it too soon. The anchor doesn't hit the sea floor, so they have to cut the anchor so that the vessel doesn't tip over. And they drift for 2 days before they're able to remain upright and get on board and dock. From here, they then continue up north. Garvey actually asked them at this point not to go to New York, but actually stop off in Philadelphia, where they're having a fundraiser and also preparing for a parade. And then they continue to Rhode Island for another fundraiser event to show off the vessel of the Black Star Line before they eventually return to New York. Now, I wanted to break down this entire voyage because I think it's important to note where the Black Star Line is going and what it's doing at all these different points. Again, we're not talking about Back to Africa movement at this point. We're talking about, one, the shipment of products, but then we're also talking about engaging in labor movements, and then, of course, visiting all of these sites of the African diaspora and of the UNIA. Garvey actually engaged on this voyage as well, in part because it was meant to be the prelude to the UNIA 1920 parade in Harlem that many individuals know about today. For those of you who don't know, in 1920, the UNIA had a parade in Harlem, and they had subsequent parades years after, and it blocked off the main street in Harlem. It was seen as sort of the height of this idea of display of Black organizing. The Black Cross nurses participated in the parade, as you'll see here. The ACL participated in the parade, a number of individuals. were engaged in it. And James Van Der Zee took a number of historical photographs from this time period as well, which I'll talk about a little bit. But really, this tied to the bigger process of the 1920 convention in Madison Square Garden. And it was here that Marcus Garvey actually talked about his experiences in visiting the entire African diaspora in the Caribbean and what it was able to do for him to guide him to understand where the UNIA should be going and what direction it should be heading in. I'm going to play some audio. It's probably going to be bad quality. This is archival audio of Garvey speaking, but I can share links afterwards and we can try to hear better if you all can't hear in the meantime. I actually just realized I might need to share my audio for this to work properly. 1 second for this. Shit. Right.
Fellow members of the Negro race, I have to thank you for the cordial welcome you have given me on this my return to the United States of America. I have been absent from this country for 5 months, being away in the West Indies and in Central America, traveling in the interest of the movement I represent as its President General. During my absence from America, I had occasion to observe with a great degree of disgust how narrow-minded the so-called leaders of the Negro race are, in that immediately after I took my departure from the country, the men who are supposed to represent and lead Negro thought in America endeavored to misrepresent me to the government of these United States by charging me with anarchy and with an intention to destroy the loyalty of Negroes to the government of this great country. These representations were made to the state and other departments, which occasioned me great embarrassment in returning to these shores. As by such information to the departments of state, the instructions were given therefrom to the various consular officers outside of the country representing the government not to give them my passport for return to this country.
All right. So I just wanted to share that one of the key features or the key things the Black Star Line was able to do was actually to facilitate this larger sort of listening tour that Garvey engaged in during this moment. And I think that's an important thing to think about, with the ability to own your own transport, to go on this speaking tour, and then to think about who some of these other critical members were on this vessel. We know Henrietta Vinton Davis is critical in this moment and becomes critical later on in the UNIA, and others as well. And so it's important to consider. I included this photograph. This is actually in 1927. This is a photograph of Marcus Garvey actually being deported from the United States. So this is arguably the last photo of Garvey leaving the US from the port of New Orleans before he heads back to Jamaica. And there's actually a new biography coming out on Queen Mother Moore. And Queen Mother Moore talks about her experience witnessing Garvey talk in New Orleans before he is deported. It was a very eventful moment. They said the police tried to come in and stop him from speaking, and most of the people in the room were actually armed and pulled out guns and told the police to allow him to speak. They then left, and Garvey continued his speech before he left for Jamaica. So, important moment. And then finally, this idea of the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company. So after the demise of the Black Star Line, and the Black Star Line's ultimate demise is a result of the fact that the FBI charges Marcus Garvey for mail fraud because he's selling these stocks through the US Postal Service. And his argument is that you are purchasing into some of the biggest and best ships that are available. Of course, the FBI wants to take down the organization, so they make the claim that he's essentially committing false advertising, as these aren't the biggest, best ships, and the SS Phillis Wheatley wasn't officially owned by them. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but there's actually a great piece that's been written reanalyzing the case of Marcus Garvey by Professor Justin Hansford that talks in more detail about the nuances of that case today. But after the demise of the Black Star Line, the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company opens up in 1924. Same location, different name. They use the same process of selling stocks to fundraise and to rebuild this shipping company. Interestingly enough, the ship they go after is the SS Orion, which they then renamed the SS Booker T. Washington. It was actually helped to purchase with the help of Cyril Briggs, who, if any of you know about the African Blood Brotherhood and some of the other Black organizations, Pan-African organizations that are working in the US around this time. It's an interesting connection in terms of how the African Blood Brotherhood is working with the UNIA and the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company. And with this ship specifically, they had plans to go to Havana, Kingston, and Cologne before returning back to New York. This ship, similar to many of the other ships prior to, again, faced several issues with their boilers and with their engines. And after a series of issues, it eventually is no longer able to fully function. And after its first voyage, it's eventually sold for scraps and the company is dissolved. But this was the fourth of the ships that was purchased in connection with that. The idea is that this new company would then go on to hopefully help engage in the Black Cross Nurses campaign, which was to offer healthcare services throughout the African diaspora. And there's a whole series of texts written about the Black Cross Nurses, although more needs to be done about that auxiliary group as well. Oh, and I should state as well that when the SS Booker T. Washington was christened, Amy Jakes Garvey gave a renowned speech there that was recorded as well. Recorded that she gave the speech, not the audio of the speech itself. All right, so we broke down the ships, we broke down where some of them have gone and what has happened since. And now I want to talk a little bit about what underwater archaeology looks like and can contribute to this idea of actually physically recovering these ships. So from the archival records, we understand that there were multiple ships. Again, 4 ships purchased. Of those 4 ships that were purchased, 2 of them sank. One of them likely sank in the Hudson or off the coast of Fort Lee, New Jersey. That's the SS Shadyside. And the second one, the SS Antonio Maceo, sank off the coast of Antilla, Cuba. We've decided that it's probably more feasible and more likely to go after this ship that's off the coast of Cuba, in part because the Hudson River is an active river waterway. It's difficult to get permissions, not only to search for ships in those water, but then to actually get permissions to shut down that waterway would be too prohibitive at the moment. So the easier one would be to go after the one off the coast of Cuba. Again, according to accounts, half of it was above water, half of it was underwater. And it was near to shore. So there's a real possibility that we should be able to at least have recollections of individuals who have seen it, if not potentially see it ourselves. Summer of last year, myself, Joel Humphrey, and several other individuals went down to Cuba to participate in a series of events happening at the University of Havana. And we are making plans now to return to Cuba to potentially look specifically at Banes and Antilla to see what legacies of the UNIA exist there and what potential remnants of this Black Star Line ship can recover. All right. One of the questions that I often get asked is, what is underwater archaeology? How does it work? And what is the process involved? I know we have Kamal Siddiqui and Sabrina Johnson on this. So we've got at least 2 divers on this Zoom call right now from the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. But they also work very closely with other organizations. I was trained by a group called Diving with a Purpose and the National Association of Black Scuba Divers to essentially convert my land archaeology experience to the underwater world, and have helped them since, along with the Slave Wrecks Project, to look for slave shipwrecks. But I just wanted to share this video from Diving with a Purpose to show you what the process looks like. When we come across a shipwreck, and there are many different ways that we locate shipwrecks. Sometimes fishermen and women know where they're located. Sometimes we get information from archival documents. Sometimes there's other surveys from people actually looking for treasure wrecks that come across these ships. But they give us the coordinates or details, or we receive those coordinates and details. We dive on a wreck, and from there we engage in a series of scientific documentation. This documentation involves literally writing with a number 2 pencil on special Mylar paper underwater. We try to sketch different pieces of the wreck while we map out different potential artifacts that are associated with the wreck. Many of the wrecks that we're looking at are wooden wrecks, and they have decayed over time. So often what's left tend to be the keel of the ship. If they're more recent ships, sometimes we'll see the boiler or pieces of the engine. and then anything that would have been on the ship. So sometimes if it's, for example, loaded with whiskey, we would find bottles of whiskey scattered, or things of that nature. Hurricanes affect the underwater environment. There's all kinds of marine life that affect the underwater environment. So sometimes these ships are underneath several feet of sediment. Sometimes they're readily exposed once we go diving. I can talk more about it in question and answer when we get there, but we tend to keep our dives to about 60 feet or less. We believe that the SS Antonio Maceo is within these depths if it is fully submerged, and therefore should be a viable case for actually documenting this wreck. And then what we do is we take all these pieces of sketches and measurements that we take, and we put them on a giant composite map. And this composite map allows us to recreate an understanding of what the entire wreckage looks like. In some cases, these wreckages can extend over several meters. In some cases, they can extend beyond half a kilometer, depending on how they were destroyed. I often say that in contrast to archaeology on land, archaeology underwater tends to resemble more of a plane wreck, because most of these wrecks either hit a reef and fall apart, or an explosion causes them to break apart. We believe the Antonio Maceo, actually the engine room blew, which means if we're excavating it, we should find a large hole, essentially where the engine room is located. It should have sank relatively to where it was, where it blew. It is possible that hurricanes may have moved it, so there's a likely radius that we would have to instill amongst it, but ideally we would come across a ship that looks akin to this. Because the SS Antonio Maceo was a metal yacht, it should be more intact than some of these other wooden-hulled ships. But we believe it is a viable candidate for this. One of the other potential elements of recording that we want to engage in is creating a 3D photogrammetric model. And this is becoming sort of standard practice now in the field of underwater archaeology. This is a case of a model that I helped to create off the coast of Hawaii of a concrete barge. But part of the ship was above water, part of it was underwater. We used an aerial drone to take images of the ship above water, and then we would essentially use underwater cameras to take photographs underwater. And with 3D software technology, we can stitch them together. So the question becomes, why would we do this? In part, it is to get a visual of the ship, to know that the ship was there. There is this bigger conversation, though, around trying to identify what was the actual cause of the sinking of the ship. It's been noted that that boiler that blew, some people have argued, was actually a sabotage. And because of that, that sabotage may have led to, again, the sinking of the ship, and may implicate potentially FBI or other organizations in the sinking of this vessel. Two more elements I want to talk about before I close out. One is that we have located an anchor that is believed to be associated with the SS Frederick Douglass. This is a smaller anchor, so likely an auxiliary anchor, but it's located in front of the house of the former Captain Joshua Cockburn. And this is in New York, upstate New York. And it's been said that Cockburn and Garvey actually got into a dispute, and in the midst of that dispute, he took the anchor, the auxiliary anchor from the ship, and claimed it himself. This is actually bolted to the rock in front of the house today. And then in this process of doing this archaeological work, I'm actively trying to recover more memorabilia, heritage, and memory around the Black Star Line and the UNIA. So in addition to the documentation of the wreck, we're actively trying to rethink how it is that we even go about the process of engaging in this research. And this is a photograph that I purchased at auction from James Vanderzee of that UNIA parade that I mentioned in 1920. And part of what I'm trying to do now with students and curators is trying to see if we can actually locate not only the other individuals in this image, but understand where it was taken, and begin to build out a more complete context of the significance and scale of this parade, as well as the UNIA and all the individuals that were involved in this process. I'm also going to be sharing another number of links with you all, so I'll make sure that they get uploaded to the website. But we're keeping an active blog updated as well, so that people can follow along to see where we are on this journey. We also want individuals who have objects that they may want digitized or made 3D versions of to potentially contribute pieces as well. Jewel Humphrey, who's a PhD student here at UCLA, is creating a digital humanities project, actually documenting the Black Star Line. This is a series of songs that reference the Black Star Line. This is a website she's created called Black Starchive. I'll provide this link as well that we can upload with the video. It shows you the different genres of music that reference the Black Star Line, where some of these individuals and songs are located. She's also done some work with the Negro World to document when references to specific cities, in this case, cities in Cuba, are mentioned in the Negro World. So you can actually click on each of these locales and get a better understanding of what people were saying about these sites and what individuals from these places were saying in general. And then there is another step being made to not only create this chronology, but then to also create a photo gallery as well. And this stems from this larger process we're trying to think of. How do we bring together a potential virtual exhibit where we don't remove these objects, these photographs, these anchors from the places where they're at, but find a way to composite and bring them together digitally so people can really understand the scope and the scale of the Black Star Line. And so this is a project she's actively engaged in now, and we'll continue to digitize more photos, documents, and so forth, and upload them and hopefully expand this website out. And the last two pieces I just want to reference here. I termed this at the beginning as this idea of recovering ancestral memory, because I think when we engage on some of these projects, they tend to be more closer to home than we initially think. I was thinking back when I was asked this question about what project would I work on next, and the Black Star Line. I was thinking back to my time working at Liberty Hall, but I was actively going through some books in my grandmother's library. And as I was pulled a book out of the library, this index card fell out. And it was notes that she must have taken over 20 years ago. She's since passed on, but notes that she took of the UNIA of Marcus Garvey, and at the bottom specifically says the Black Star Line. And so this idea that my grandmother may have been studying the Black Star Line 20 or 30 years ago, and now her grandson is actually looking for the ships, I think is a direct connection that many individuals on this call, I think, can resonate with and understand that what we're engaging in is an intergenerational conversation. And tied to this, I just want to highlight the fact that Paul Coates and Black Classic Press are engaging in the publication of more text around Marcus Garvey. Justin Hansford, a law professor at Howard University, just published this piece, which revisits the trial of Marcus Garvey. Dr. Julius Garvey provides a foreword and adds his perspective to this importance. And this is directly tied to attempts to get a posthumous pardon for Marcus Garvey in the United States. It's been an ongoing process for multiple years as well. And then finally, I just want to acknowledge the transition of Dr. Emory Tolbert, who wrote the seminal text, The UNIA and Black Los Angeles. He recently made his transition, and his wife is currently looking for an archive for his books to go into. And so I want us to keep this in mind as we do this work, that again, the work that we're trying to do to retain this memory and to bring this memory back into popular knowledge really is a communal activity that will involve all of us moving forward. And I'm going to stop it there and maybe open it up for some questions.
Yeah, give thanks, give thanks. You've surpassed our expectations, you know. A rich and very much comprehensive take from historical to activism, you know. We see that you're not an armchair revolutionary. You're really on the front line in a serious way. I want to open up for any questions. I see Robbie's hand up. Robbie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rasulani. Yes, Bro Justin, that was excellent. I mean, you went all the way from ancestral memory to actual scuba diving. I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, big respect. I have just one question, and the thing that really struck me, you know, when we usually, if you look on Wikipedia, or we usually have a kind of casual reasoning on the Black nurses, right? You know, the Black Cross, right? It's usually presumed that they're just doing health and education, right? But you're putting out there that they're doing a lot more. And, you know, oftentimes, you know, I struggle with this narrative of Garveyism and the UNIA as just a man thing. So I wonder if I could just, you know, reason on that a little.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I point a lot of individuals to the work of Natanya Duncan, who really wrote the dissertation and is writing the seminal text on Henrietta Vinton Davis, and the work that Henrietta Vinton Davis did throughout the organization. But then more importantly, after Garvey is extradited or sent out of the US, she takes over leading the organization. And a number of individuals, Eula Taylor, Dr. Eula Taylor and others have written about Amy Jakes Garvey and the Ashwood Garvey and others. I think it's critical that we understand the significance of the community in the work of this organizing. And as we're doing this work, I think one of the things that's going to come out more is in some ways a decentering of Garvey specifically, and a recentering of the power of people in these organizations. We're going to begin to see more stories of youth as well, and youth organizing and youth work. I think that's going to be critical in mobilizing throughout the space as well. I think more work needs to be done, but we're probably going to see that there's more women heavily involved, specifically on these ships too. We don't really hear about women in the maritime industry, but that's going to be a critical component, particularly because a number of members on the board of the Black Star Line were women as well. So I'm looking forward to that work coming out.
Yeah, I note how you mentioned that what he was trying to achieve is kind of more like the outer space level of transportation. And, you know, if you think about a mobile hospital and a way of himself connecting with his wide diasporic following, sort of consolidating the objectives of the movement, and also trading in a way that made Black people who were previously excluded involved. This is in and of itself a problem to white supremacy. It has to be at this point in time, because this is the missing link, so to speak, you know, and still is the missing link. I see two hands, Jill and then Rasila. Please go ahead.
Well, it's really Jake, my brethren, but give thanks. Brother Justin, give thanks. That's a wonderful presentation. That's really, you know, many thoughts and, you know, questions about it. But I'm wondering where the distribution of support for the Black Star Line came from, whether it was primarily Caribbean US based. We know that Garvey had footholds on many parts of the African continent. And I'm curious about whether I've been in Nigeria and I've been to the District 6 Museum there, which has UNIA memorabilia and talks about Garvey's presence, the Garveyite presence in Nigeria, and the same in South Africa. I'm wondering if, you know, what we know about support for the Black Star Line coming from the continent itself. That's one question. And then the second question is, because I'm presently in Panama with my daughter Jill, and know of I've been to Cologne and been to the Liberty Hall there, as have other people on this group of attendees I know. I'm wondering whether or not wasn't the kind of spark for the FBI undermining of Garvey given by the displeasure of the American governor here, who had a campaign to undermine Garvey and was in direct contact with J. Edgar Hoover about his activities, about the UNIA activities here. So those two questions.
Great questions. Your second question, I'm not sure, but I wouldn't doubt it. In part, as I got deeper into researching the Black Star Line, what they were doing, Garvey's connections with the United Fruit Company come up continually. And with that come up this deeper conversation of the UNIA's sort of influence and power in labor organizing more generally. As we know, that the Panama Canal and construction of the Panama Canal was a critical conversation, as well as United Fruit Company work. And I think a number of these government officials, as well as companies, recognize the power of the organization, the power of Garvey in influencing this. So I could definitely see that being an impetus in this process. For the second part about African involvement, I haven't come across a lot of African involvement in the Black Star Line as of yet. Part of the work we're trying to do is actually specifically locate when we can get some of these stocks from. From what I've seen, most of the stocks are being purchased in the Caribbean and the United States. Cuba alone raises several thousands of dollars selling these stocks at $5 a piece. So there's a large contingency of individuals from there. We do know too, there's stories of individuals like Casper Holsting, originally from the Virgin Islands, who was involved in some numbers running in New York that actually financed a lot of UNIA activities in Harlem specifically. So there's likely multiple streams of funding where they're coming from. The African connection is certainly there, and I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that the UNIA, their role with the maritime industry was so significant that I think it would have been impossible not for there to be engagement. And it might be interesting to look more about people from the Caribbean that are actually ending up in places like Nigeria and South Africa as well, to see what those turn into, what those look like.
Okay, give thanks. Rasila, welcome. And yeah.
Yes, give thanks. I think Jake said he had 2 questions. So I'll allow him to ask the other question and then I'll forward.
My brother Sila, I did ask the 2 questions. One was about Panama and the other one about UNA and Africa. So you're free. Go through.
Greetings. I don't think I know the work that you are conducting in bringing the memories of the Black Star Line, a tangible memory of it in a space to bring the public consciousness to the reality of what happened to the Black Star Liner is an awesome endeavor. I want to ask 2 questions. I listened to you keenly in terms of the Black Star Liner, his administration, fundraiser, and so forth. And the reason I'm asking this is because I am a descendant of Jamaicans that went to Panama through the U.S. Fruit Company. And I have a deep knowledge of the situation that happened with the Black Star Line. So my first question is this. You said that some of the situation and sabotage happened with the Black Star Line, not because of, I will say, negligence, but because of, I will say, not being prepared to deal with a maritime enterprise. And I say that because of what happened to all the ships. My question is this: in your study, going wherever you went to acquire information, have you heard anyone with the knowledge of the UNI, if a feasibility study was conducted before they even ventured into purchasing one ship? That's my first question. Could you answer that, please? Yes or no, or if you know,
Yeah, great.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I don't I haven't come across this idea of a feasibility study of the entire organization in terms of whether or not having a shipping company would be financially viable as a means and what the process of procuring those ships would be like. I have heard that prior to purchasing the ships, there was somebody in charge of inspecting and negotiating the purchase of those ships. And this is where some of the conflict arises, because one of the arguments is that SS Frederick Douglass was purchased by Joshua Cockburn, who becomes the first captain. And the idea is he has experience as a captain on a ship and should be able to tell whether or not a ship is in working order or not and what repairs need to be made. But the argument was made that he intentionally purchased the ship much more than it was worth because the seller of the ship was going to give him additional funds under the table. And so that's where this argument of somebody sabotage arises. But that's the extent to which I've heard so far.
Okay. The thing is this: because you're the captain on a ship, don't mean that you know maritime administration and operation. A ship captain might know how to navigate through the oceans and sea, but to put a feasibility study together takes a lot of research. So that is something that in the process of you doing that excellent work that you are doing, that's something that have to be explored. My second question is this: do you know that in the African diaspora, on the continent, and in the Caribbean, North, Central, and South America, there's a push for the resurgency of the Black Star Liner?
No, I'm not aware of the current push for the resurgence. No. Could you elaborate? Yeah, that's powerful.
I am not going to elaborate on that. I will rather talk to Dr. Homiak or Dr. Jelani, and we share information where we could link, because I know others want to ask questions. But there's a push happening right now, and I think with your work and that push, the son of Marcus Garvey is involved in that forward push. And one of the major things that we are embarking is a feasibility study, especially our brothers and sisters in Panama. Why? And I'm going to tell you why. In Panama, there's divers. In Panama, the greatest, I believe, and I know that the greatest concentration of maritime technocrat coming from our African stuff is in Panama. And they're the one that is actually the maritime technocrat are pushing that the resurgency of Black Star Line. Like your project, the resurgency of the Black Star Liner is a monumental endeavor. It's going to take a lot of money, and how to put that money together to make sure that the mistake that our ancestors made, because my great-grandmother and grandfather was not just members of the UNA. My great-grandfather from Jamaica, St. Thomas, he was a maritime machinist. And I end up in Panama because my great-grandmother was born in Cuba, and with his travel, he ended up in Panama, and that was before the building of the Panama Canal. So, yes, I think the best, so I could shut up my mouth, is for after this reasoning, if we want to share contacts, and then we could talk about that, because I think the resurgency of the Black Star Liner and the recovery of the memory of the Black Star Liner is very key for once to understand our people, to understand what happened, and what is coming. Give thanks.
Rasila, I want you to know that one of the reasons why Justin is here is exactly for that kind of networking and linking. When I became exposed to his work through his own online sharing, I thought that Jamaicans needed to, in some way, be involved or aware, and in any and every way, be certainly contributing to and being updated as the work continues. So indeed, I will do the necessaries for that link to be made for certain. Any further questions? I see a few hands raised. Commissioner Nicole, you wish to go ahead? I'm not sure who that is.
Give thanks, give thanks. Commissioner Nicole Cole, all the way from the oil-rich Guyana in South America, giving thanks, the home of the CARICOM Secretariat. Thank you very much to the brother for his erudite presentation. My question surrounds, given the fact that he mentioned that the Black Star liner may have been sabotaged, on his team, do you think that having a forensic archaeologist or a forensic marine biologist, someone who can go in depth and to actually investigate the source of the sabotage, will help to bring more, shine more light, shine a spotlight upon what really happened? So we know forensics deals with trying to get to the truth, whether to exonerate or to actually bring persons in guilt. Your gears, when you do your diving, do you have what we call protective gears? The cage, the shields. We know that within the Caribbean, because of climate change, you have a lot of sharks that are entering waters that wouldn't normally be there. Do you take precautions against that? And is there a standard operating procedure that guides your profession as relates to the depth in which you can go as a diver, a archaeological diver? We want to bring more attention to what really happened to the Black Star liner by having a forensic marine biologist or a forensic archaeologist.
Yeah, give thanks. It was going in and out, but I think I got the bulk of the questions. Yes, definitely. I think what I want this to ultimately become is, once the ship is located, to be able to bring on a team of individuals from all over the world. And not only for the various angles and analyses and expertise that will arrive, but also I think it's critically important that people can then tell their grandchildren, their children, people in their community, I helped to work on the Black Star Line. I helped to look for the Black Star Line. Because it's those sparks that then kick off the next generation's questions around what can happen in the future and what can this look like. The goal with this specifically, to create these 3D models, is that we would have the model that could then be looked at more critically and forensically to see if it is an explosion that's an intentional explosion that involved sort of extra dynamite or whatever may have been used, or if it's considered a natural occurrence. This is beyond my expertise, but would definitely involve somebody with that background being engaged in it. There are a number of rules and standards we follow in maritime archaeology. Whenever we do scientific work underwater, we have to have a series of protocol, dive protocol. We have to have a dive safety officer scuba diving with us. It often overlaps with marine biology, so we often have marine biologists engage in this work. And groups like Diving with a Purpose and National Society of Black Scuba Divers, National Society of Black Scuba Divers, are engaged in this work as well. And so you don't have to be an underwater archaeologist to help do underwater archaeology. And so we're trying to also then see if we can build that out. We've done some of this work in St. Croix and the Virgin Islands with training youth in diving, and then getting them to engage in some of our archaeological work. So we hope to be able to expand that beyond. Thank you for this. Give thanks.
All right, give thanks. We have a couple more questions. I think I see Kamal and then Sabrina.
Yes, thank
And
you.
also
Thank you.
Latoya's iPhone.
Yes.
Thank you, brother Jelani. And Justin, it's great to see you, brother. And let me turn on my video here. Yeah, just have a few questions. One, you're making us proud, man. I'm Kamal Siddiqui with Diving with a Purpose. I'm a lead instructor and also on the board of the organization. So again, you're making us very proud. I really appreciate it, man. And this critical work that you and your team and Jewel are doing. So I just have a couple of quick questions, very brief, concerning Marcus Garvey's travels on those vessels. Are you all documenting the actual trips that he took on each of these vessels, if he did at all, particularly on the Antonio Maceo? And also, just one additional kind of small question: these peripheral vessels that are significant in their legacy as we try to, decolonize, the Marcus Garvey story. Do you know the name of the vessel that he departed out of New Orleans, headed for Jamaica?
Great question. I don't know the name of the vessel that he departed out of New
That's
Orleans
okay.
from, but I can look that up. Yes, in terms of the voyages, so our goal is to map all of the voyages digitally. Like as I mentioned, Drew's background is in digital humanities, so she's creating these digital maps. And we do know Garvey was on the SS Frederick Douglass. I don't know, he wasn't on all the ships, that's for sure. And so, yeah, it would be critical to note who specifically was on these ships. I think it's key, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that Henrietta Vinton Davis was on some of these ships as well, and the fact that she was already in Panama. It's interesting to track where these individuals are going over time and how they intersect and when they cross. So yeah, that's something that we'll definitely keep in mind.
Okay, all right. Well, appreciate your work, man.
Thank you.
Yes, please
No,
go
yeah.
ahead, Sabrina.
Yes, peaceful greetings. And likewise, Justin, thank you for really coalescing this ancestor-centered work with and memory recovery with conventional archaeology techniques. My question is this: as you've really delved into this research and see up close the magnitude of the scope of organizing and mobilizing that was accomplished in the early part of the 20th century, and then look at today's social and IT technology context. Certainly, there's tremendous efficiencies and conveniences that the social context and engagement that we're in the midst of now offers, but also it brings forward a lot of vulnerabilities. So have you thought about, are you able to extract any strategies and techniques that we might try to incorporate back into how we do work to both conduct research, but also just basic organizing and mobilizing for large numbers of folks who are scattered beyond, throughout the diaspora?
Yeah, thank you. Give thanks, Sabrina, for all the work that you do as well. Yeah, this is something that I've been in conversations with Justin Hansford extensively about this project, but also about Garvey, what he was able to do. And one of the things that came out was this idea of doing a listening tour prior to this sort of major Madison Square Garden moment. And a lot of us know that he sold out Madison Square Garden, and we understand the gravity of that. But we don't understand necessarily the 7 months that were spent prior to that, just listening to what is happening in all of these places throughout the diaspora. Sometimes it's economic situations, sometimes it's healthcare situations, sometimes it's other things that we need to address in these spaces. And I've been told, I haven't looked into this further, but I've been told that Elijah Muhammad used a similar method before he took on his role as leading the Nation of Islam, where he went on a listening tour for the first 7 years before he ever gave a speech. And I think this is a critical component of Black organizing that we need to actively engage in again. There's often, especially when we read these stories or hear these narratives, we hear about the individuals like Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and he's going around giving these speeches, but we don't often understand that he's speaking in ways that reflect to people's specific situations in their specific contexts, because he took the time to actually do that work. I think Garvey mirrored that in many ways, and I think others mirror that in many ways as well. An organization like the UNIA and the Black Star Line that has a membership as wide and as vast, with people of many different responsibilities, interests, faiths, religious practices, all of these things, to be able to bring them all together, that's required. So I'm hoping we can do more of that, and we can really learn about the extent of it. So yeah, it's a good, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, give thanks. Latoya, I think your hand, yeah.
Hi, Justin. It's Latoya from Bermuda. I actually just jumped off of a flight, and Sister Colleen sent me the link for this meeting. And I'm at my auntie's house up Smoky Vale, and she wanted me to let you know how proud she is of you. So
Give thanks to the family, yes. This is my
So
first home when I landed in Jamaica. So.
Exactly. She says, Justin, oh my God, Latoya. He's on the radio. I'm like, no, it's a Zoom call. But like I said, I missed a good bit of the your presentation, but I'm sure it was phenomenal. And I feel like I hear you alluding to this, but I was just wondering, like the artifacts and the shipwrecks that you guys have already discovered, can you provide some insight into like the broader historical significance of like Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line in the context of the global African diaspora and the Pan-African movement, like currently?
Definitely. Yeah, this was a big question that we had initially going into this project. And I say we because the we expands extensively as more people get involved. But one of the issues we were confronted with is, for example, locating the anchor. We reached out to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We thought about other potential spaces to see, would it make sense to try to collect it as an object that could then go into an exhibition. And of course, we're not the ones to make that decision, but we thought, does it make sense to let people know that these things are out there and exist? And after a series of conversations with ourselves and with others, we decided that it's best for these objects to stay in the communities where they're at, because they signal a certain history and memory as well. The anchor being in Scarsdale, New York, tells us a whole other history around, well, what is this anchor of the Black Star Line doing in a predominantly white community in New York? And then it goes into the troubles that this captain had trying to integrate this white community, and this whole network and series and other conversations that come from that. So we decided it's best to see if we can digitize some of these and make them available online for those who are willing to access them online, and begin to think and reconfigure how we can create and curate exhibitions around this. We've heard that there's an ashtray from one of the Black Star Line ships in somebody's family possession. Some people have stocks, the physical paper, these stocks in their family possessions, and they should remain there, because that becomes a critical conversation for the family to say, oh, you know, your great-great-grandparent or your grandparent actually was involved in pushing forward this organization. And that's what inspires and leads. I'm also interested in this idea of creating and recreating visions and ideas based off of the Black Star Line. My biggest thing is if we could get a Black Cross nurse's uniform, to me, that would be amazing. But I'm also thinking, what would it take for somebody to actually create a new Black Cross nurse's uniform in the 21st century? And what would that mean to know that there's a group of volunteers out there that are willing to do this healthcare work and see the significance of it and the political organizing attached to that? So those are the things that I'm actively trying to think through. I think in the digital space now, it provides us one medium by which to do that, and hopefully raise awareness in these local spaces where people start asking questions to their parents and grandparents around what that can look like.
All right. I see we have another hand, Kwadwo.
Yeah, this is Kofi, Babakwejo's son. I was asking, like, because I'm a scuba diver, how do we like get involved if we're interested, and who do we reach out to, and like things of that nature?
Yeah, great question. I would say I'm going to provide all my contact information, and this video is going to be uploaded later. So I would say definitely send me an email. What we're trying to do now is trying to actually locate the ship first. Once the ship is located, then we're going to try to organize teams of individuals to help with this work. We're going to need Black divers. We're going to need engineers. We're going to need forensic scientists. We're going to need all kinds of different people engaged in this project in different ways. And the questions are going to be unending, I'm sure. So hopefully if we can get your contact information, you can reach out. We can begin to create that list and curate that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We've been going at it for a while. Justin, I think as Kwame said, come on, you know, you're really making us proud. In fact, you have your official Jamaican papers. We've claimed you as well as a yard man, you know. But for me, it was really important because that video we started with Ras Sekou, he really underscored that Marley, sorry, not Marley this time, but Garvey had really centered on an African diasporic vision, you know, and I think that you've been able to show some of what must have been the problematic that someone like him would have had, and the fact that he needed to find a way, as he always was the one to do, you know, to make the way where there was no way. The Garvey issue is still present for us in the Caribbean and beyond. Travel within the Caribbean is more expensive than going to the continent. And I'm not exaggerating, you know, and a big part of that is that there is still no Black Star Line, you know. So I'm glad the work that is being done. In a sense, your forensic excavation of the past is important for the forensic future that we need to construct around that vision. But you know what is interesting to me, the whole approach that Garvey took to this project is what they call crowdfunding today. It's like an early version of that, where, you know, yeah, this is to happen and we want you to help us to make this happen. And if you really think of his logic, you know, if his numbers were as strong as he said, and or as we know, and people committed their $5 or whatever, yeah, you know, unhindered, unmolested, Garvey really would have made something real of that vision. And yeah, important works, my brother. Any final questions before we seal? I see we're approaching.
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing. This is a sort of movement and a push in terms of this long-term work that we're trying to push forward. And I have my students engaged in it, hope to get more people engaged in it. But I've told people, I anticipate this project to take about 5 years. After this project, I want to begin to explore the idea of retracing Mansa Musa's voyage from Mali to Mecca, archaeologically. And after that, which I anticipate maybe take another 20 plus years, I want to revisit this idea that Ivan van Sertima said, that Africans came to the Americas before Columbus. And that's going to take underwater archaeologists, land archaeologists, marine biologists, botanic, all kinds of people. But it's something that we can do. And I think this idea of collective research for Black history and Black culture is something that is reality, and we can make it. So I give thanks to you all doing this work, teaching the next generation, to everybody involved. And I think collectively we can make this a reality.
Well said, and give thanks. You've taken us from the furthest visions of outer space to the deepest depths of the past and present. You know, we can't really ask for more than that. Thank you for being so generous with your spirit as usual, and to have inspired us all this evening with the interconnection of the work that really Garvey has set for us. We're still so under realized as far as our approximate achievement. That's really where you started, that with the tools we have, we really should be the Elon Musks and the Zuckerberg, you know, we should be commandeering the technology to benefit our community in the way that Garvey had demonstrated that need. Well, Justin,
Restylani, just so the eye knows, there were a couple of hands just for quick last minute.
Oh, okay. Let me.
Is
I'm
Henry
not
and
in
then
that view.
Dolgen. Henry and then Dolgen.
Oh, my apology. Yes. So please, Henry.
Sorry about that. I couldn't find the hand, but that was a really great presentation. I really loved it. And I like the application of archaeology to all these questions. And I have sort of a general question to Garvey historians and followers. So I spent most of my life working in Ethiopia looking for human ancestors. And I actually got your talk from a teacher of mine in Shashamane named Kabinda Hebre Selassie. Anyway, he turned me on to it. I went with him to the National Museum and looked at ancestors with him. And one of the things that I find just is a big missing part of history that's told. Obviously, the archaeology of it and everything is super important, and there should be a lot more sort of spiritual approach to that endeavor, because it's actually a truly deep and spiritual endeavor. But one of the things that you find is that the true first theorists of Africa as the origin place for humans are completely erased from the scientific discourse. And it's really funny because in almost every other thread of history, you have this idea that happens before all the testing. And that's the original idea. And then that is often given credit for the original idea going way far back. And then you have all this other evidence that tests it. And then later we find out that all humans are from Africa. But the original ones, I mean, Garvey wasn't one of the very first, but he was definitely one of them. But like David Walker, Dubois, and some of those guys, when you get into it, I mean, how aware is the movement of Garvey studies that what he was saying is of sublime importance for everybody? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer briefly, I have a piece coming out with another student of mine about archaeology in Ebony magazine to talk about all the ways in which the Black popular press was conveying and discussing archaeological research way before we were included in the conversation, let's say. The Negro world becomes critical in that as well. And the Negro world talks specifically about archaeological finds. Ancient Egypt, Francis Kemet features heavily. A lot of people don't realize this, but King Tut's tomb, when King Tut's tomb was opened in the 1920s, Elaine Locke actually went to Egypt to witness the opening of that tomb. And it got written about in places like the Negro world and these other places. So we've always been at the center of these conversations. We've tended to keep it amongst ourselves. And if you look at some of these newspapers, they'll tell you that they were actually doing speaking tours, which is why we need to also actively understand how it is we communicate our intellectual history and intellectual knowledge. They were speaking in churches about the latest archaeological finds, not in the textbooks. So I think that's a key piece that we talked about earlier we could take away from organizing tradition.
Yeah, give thanks. And I suppose a lot of this has to do with what we deem as mainstream transmission of ideas, you know, that we look to certain places to see certain things, but there are certainly other places that these conversations are happening and have, you know, their own strength of network in those spaces. There was another question. Is that?
Yeah, it's Dawn.
Okay.
OJN.
Yes. Dawn, please go ahead. Yeah,
right. Okay. Greetings, everyone. Greetings, Justin. Yeah, first of all, trust me, give thanks for your presentation. It was very, very informative. I'm in the shipping world, so I was particularly intrigued by the routes that the vessel was taking, you know, going to Guatemala, Costa Rica. And, you know, in my mind, I started to think about, the voyage time, because, you know, from one port to another, it's about 3 days. You know, if you're going from here to Miami, it's 3. You know, if you're going Curacao, it's 9. So those things started to play in my mind. And then, of course, I thought, wow, you know, what Garvey was doing at this time was very pioneering. I mean, and to have 4 ships, you know, so, you know, I really, really, really got excited. So where my mind started to go now was, you know, of course, I'm a businesswoman. So of course I'm looking at, okay, similar to what Carlos Seal was saying and some others, like, you know, what about the feasibility study? What could have caused, you know, this pioneering business to fail? But of course, I got a sense because the speech that you played said something, and I heard Garvey talk about a betrayal. You know what I mean? And if you have persons on the inside that is working with the FBI and they see that, you know, that if this really take off, you know, the black world are gonna get so friggin' powerful. You understand what I'm saying? That this is not what we want at this time, right? So I kind of felt that from the Garvey speech. So I started to wonder now with you guys going back and digging and diving for the ship, because I think you mentioned that it was in Cuba, that you'd be going, right? Right, because the one in New York, you know, that's a busier port, and I understand the shipping world, but the one in Cuba, and the questions that I started to think about is, you know, yeah, ships can have mechanical problem, but boiler problem is just one, okay? We're talking about, you know, each time a vessel goes to a port, it needs to be serviced. All right. So it would be good also if you could find, you know, as you go along and you dig up the history about the ship, that persons will connect with you that can tell you more about the crew. I mean, who did he have on board? Who were the engineers? You know what I mean? You need, of course, you're going to need a little steward or a man then we can lash the container and all of that. But also, what type of ship was it? Because you find that you can't be mixing people and cargo. You understand what I'm saying? So how was the ship designed? Was it designed in a way to carry the cargo? Because probably in that time, I'm not sure, maybe you can research it to see how was container carried? Because of course, did you have the 20-foot and the 40-foot container then where you have no? You know what I mean? And so how was it strapped onto the ship? That kind of history can entice us and you know, let us get a visual of how was it sailing them time? What was the ship worth them time then? You know, and you know, now they measure volume by TEU, 20-foot equivalent units. So when you're looking at what a vessel can carry, you're looking in that type of thinking, right? So you could, you know, when you do your research, find out how much this ship could really carry. And then, why wasn't he getting the support? We can't really first off and say, boy, he wasn't getting it because he's a black man to try something. And for vessels to make money, they need to go to ports and get cargo. So if he's carrying people, that's not economical, because unless he's charging the persons a fee, you won't see the profit. So was he getting the support? Were there tradesmen? Were there exporters? What was he carrying? When he went to this port, what was he collecting? So those are the kind of things that, you know, I just wanted to share with you. I don't know if you have the answers now, or, you know, you could make a note of that when you're doing your research. And, you know, it's going to take some time, but these are some of the things that you could probably answer. You know what I mean? What were more than just the boiler issues? You know, what were the type of supports he was getting at the ports? What kind of cargo was he carrying? How was the vessel designed to carry the cargo? How much capacity can it carry? Right? And how much capacity was he carrying? Kind of. All right.
Yeah,
but I really thank you. It was very stimulating and I really enjoyed your presentation.
Give thanks. Yeah, Jewel and I am PhD student working on the paper now that's going to get into more of those details. But everything you said is definitely correct. I don't think they anticipated prohibition coming the way it did. Of course, it takes time to build out a corporation. If you anticipate shipping alcohol, especially internationally, and then the government cuts you off, that's a whole other sort of thorn into your business venture if you're thinking in those means. And then, of course, the captain of a yacht is not going to be the same captain you're going to use for a large steamer, especially for a transatlantic voyage. So all those things definitely need to be reanalyzed, and then hopefully will be reanalyzed. We're going to talk specifically about the SS Frederick Douglass in the paper that we write, but I think it can be expanded beyond that as well. Thanks.
Okay, great.
And give thanks. And Sister Dawn, I should have anticipated that you would not have missed your mark, you know. But important nuances, I hear you emphasizing that can really bring a certain kind of three-dimensional and contemporary sort of understanding as to what the issues may have been as well. Yeah, so I think we're at that point again, Justin, if I'm not premature. My screen was a little off, so I wasn't seeing what was important to happen. I think we've covered most of the queries. You will provide your contacts for people who are interested in continuing the conversation in different ways. But as I said, you know, I think that this conversation is going to continue for us in at least the Jamaican space for a while, because in a way, people are now just being reminded of who you are and what your work is looking like for us, you know. And yeah, continue to make us proud. We're going to share some of your music selection to close out, I think, or no, we're sharing the Black Star liner.
It's appropriate too. It's appropriate.
It's appropriate as well. But yeah, Justin, it was wonderful for I. We give thanks. I want to invite Raseku if I still see him present.
It's 18 hours.
Is Raseku with us here still on
I'm here.
Please.
I'm here.
So Raseku, I want to ask you to just close us out with a word of, thanksgiving.
Yes.
As you start, some people were not hearing you that clearly, but please just usher us out with the appropriate and thanks.
Yes, we give thanks for the great universe. We give thanks for Mother Earth. We give thanks for Father Time. We give thanks for the great ancestors, spirits, and spirit guide. We give thanks to Haile Selassie I, Empress Menen Asfa, I Perfect Balance, and for I, the Train of Rastafari. We give thanks to Bongo Watu, Bongo Time, Bongo Chevron, Mama BBI, Bongo Rocky, Man Pa Bois, Man Pa Shanti. We give thanks for Aikel Tafari. We give thanks for Ambassador Frankai, Sister Adama, Sister Ajania, Sister Cyril, Sister Margaret, Bongo Ira, Bengi Irie. We give thanks. We give thanks to Shepherd Attili Rogers. We give thanks to Leonard Howell. We give thanks for all the great peacemakers, Ras Henry. We give thanks for Nathaniel Hibbert. We give thanks to Archibald Dunkley. We give thanks to Marcus Garvey Jr. We give thanks for Malcolm X, Amy Ashford Garvey, Amy Jacks Garvey, Betty Shabazz, Bertha Scott King. We give thanks to Martin Luther King. We give thanks to Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, Boukman, Christophe, and all the great heroes and sheroes of Haiti, whose name we forget to mention, whose name we do not know. We give thanks for Ras Mukonan, the father of their Majesty. We give thanks to Yeshebet Ali, mother of their Majesty. We give thanks to all the great warriors, the great intellects who left us with all the great knowledge to continue in the works of their Majesties. And we give thanks to Mansa Musa. We give thanks to Mansa Abubakar II, the brother of Mansa Musa, who embarked on a great voyage here long before Europeans came here. We give thanks for love. We give thanks for life. We give thanks for Ramses III, my great ancestor, and other Ramseses. We give thanks for love and light. We give thanks for the great Kwame Nkrumah Sajifo. We give thanks Sekou Touré, Michael Cabral, Thomas Sankara, Samora Machel, Trace Olumba, Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Steve Biko, Robert Mugabe, Joshua Nkrumah. We give thanks to Empress Taitu. We give thanks to Emperor Menelik II. And again, repeat, we give thanks to Haile Selassie I and Empress Menen Asfa, and I, Prophet Banan. We give thanks for this great moment of giving information, sharing information by our brethren Justin. It was a great presentation, and we give thanks for the SOSA crew for being able to host it. We give thanks for love, we give thanks for life. Haile I, the first, Empress Menen Asfa, for perfect balance. We give thanks, Justin, and we give thanks for love.
Yes, I give thanks, Sekou, Tafari, our Marcus Garvey, Rastafari publisher in that vein, you know. Thank you all who have joined us. I see, you know, some of the faces that we don't regularly see. Mama Eleanor, thanks for turning up and being here with us. Dr. Baker, we see you as well. Give thanks for the passing through. Joseph, you're there as well. Thank you for, you know, appearing. Queen Mother, I feel. Good to see you here. I trust it was okay. And then Velma Pollard, the original Dread Talk, is with us here as well. Good to see you. If I missed anyone, it's because the names might elude me right now, but we give thanks to all of those who trotted into the space to share the, well, it's not entirely unheard of research, but certainly new approaches to Marcus Garvey's legacy that was shared this evening. And we look forward to the conversation continuing, and we'll update you of such. Bless you all, and thanks again, Dr. Justin Donovan. You make us proud. Yeah, bless you. All right. Well, Justin, I think we've stretched you as far as we can. And we are recognizing that you're on another time zone as well as others here on this call. Yeah, we don't want to take you from your family any longer, but this family has really appreciated, love the time you have spent here. And I trust we will see more of you and hear more from you as time goes forward. All the best, my brother, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you all for joining us here. And, you know, I give thanks for the quality of the work that is happening.